Alright, as per requested, um, my thoughts on whether or not the United States would win a war versus Russia or China. Um, I think really that's an open ended question. I don't think it can really directly be answered. Um, for one, you have to look at population, you have to look at industrial capability, food production capability, resources at hand, resources that can be purchased or mined, drilled, etc. Um, so I don't really think that it's a necessarily a legitimate question. However, I will say that Russia and the United States have been at war for quite a long time. Obviously, since post World War II. I don't believe that the Cold War ever ended. For one, I believe in a way that it's still ongoing. It's just not publicized the way it used to be. Um, I have a lot of information that would be relevant to it, so I'm going to try and condense that down to give a better understanding of why I think that the Cold War is still ongoing. We still have an arms race, obviously, but instead of masses, uh, as far as the amounts of weapons or mass amount of tanks, mass amount of bombers that can fly across the world, or fighter jets or guns, and etc. Now what you have is a arms race of technology where a few of a specific type of vehicle or weapon can do as much damage now as what 1,000 weapons could have done in the 70s, 80s, etc. So I think now it's more of a an arms race of technology, which definitely China is in, um, and obviously Russia for that matter, and other countries. It's just part of the world that we live in. But anyway, back to the reason why I believe the Cold War never ended. I think what you have to look at is under the Reagan era, and even before, obviously, Kennedy, Carter, all those different presidents that had to deal with the Cold War or specifically deal with the Soviet Union, you have to look at not a ground war or not direct war as far as what we consider war now, but what you have to look at is the covert side of it, which brings up a topic that I already discussed, which would be Libya. Libya was part of that, as well as all the other African nations in North Africa and various other Middle East nations as well, and Central Asia and Southeast Asia as well. What it was you had CIA teams and KGB teams and various other covert organizations and undoubtedly hired um, corporations or companies or people that were going into these countries and trying to exploit either the locals or the government. And they were either inciting riots or preventing riots. And it was to sway those specific countries to basically take a side, either democracy or communism. And China as well, which not a lot of people read about this, but China was also a huge part of the Cold War, and China had a gigantic part in trying to sway some of these countries, Afghanistan being one of them. Um, not always did China take the side of Russia. In some cases, China took the side of their own country, trying to spread their influence, because obviously um, Maoist communism is slightly different than what you would have found in the Soviet Union. However, under the same principles, obviously. But obviously, Chinese are different people, and they will undoubtedly do their own thing. I don't think very often did you find China and Russia working hand in hand to undermine U.S. efforts in a specific country. I think that if they were there, they were aiding the Russians by giving the United States something else to worry about, but not necessarily working with the Russians to get what the Russians wanted, if that makes sense. So, what you have to look at is all these different nations in North Africa and in the Middle East and in Asia basically constantly for 40 plus years have been going through superpowers coming into their countries covertly and inciting riots or preventing riots or making business deals that flood in Western ideology or Western technology, or for that matter, Eastern, under Chinese influence. A good example of that would be Panama. Obviously, the United States had its issues with Panama. We eliminated Noriega, but if you go to Panama now, there's not a gigantic U.S. presence. What you find is a giant Chinese presence, and it's economically driven. So it's a different type of war as far as what you would consider arms race or war. It's more of a economic war, and though people may disagree with me, I believe that those types of things typically always lead to a physical war, an army versus an army war, whether it be 5 years down the line or 40, 50, 60 years down the line. I just believe that it typically always leads to that. And in a major military confrontation between the United States and Russia, or the United States and China, I think what you have to look at is the nation's capability. You also have to look at the track record of the military capability, and you have to look at what the country can do. I think that the United States has undoubtedly proven several times over that it has the capability to defend itself extremely well, even though it's always usually outnumbered. When we invaded Iraq, we were severely outnumbered. We did an absolute successful job of disabling the military, disabling the infrastructure, and eliminating the government. I think you have to look at that with Russia and China. I don't believe that the United States would ever try to invade those countries, and it would be stupid to. The same as it would be for either one of those to try to invade our country. It would be their downfall. Not only would it cost trillions of dollars to get the militaries to those places, but just the fight alone would disable an army. So putting that in perspective, I think that you have to continue to look at the covert and economic wars that are going on in the world. As it would seem right now, China would be technically winning that war since we're in debt to them. However, I think what you also have to look at is they are also inflating their money. And that is not necessarily always just going to harm us, it's also going to harm them. I do believe, and this is just my personal opinion, that if it were ever to become a confrontation between the United States and China, that Russia would actually take our side. People may disagree with that, but I think that the US and Russia have too many ties that stem from the Cold War that we can use against each other, that politically minded people would be more prone to siding with each other against a common enemy rather than going against each other. So that's my 2 cents on that. If you want to read more about it and understand more about that part, you need to read From the Shadows by Robert M. Gates. He happens to be the current Secretary of Defense. He has held many governmental positions, Director of Intelligence, etc. It is a brilliant book, and it will give you more insight into the Russia, China, United States covert battles that have been going on for decades. So, but anyway, there you go.